people will be familiar, I think, with your story because your wife's parents and other relatives were in the thick of that early fighting, weren't they? And I know that your in-laws did get out eventually, but it was an incredibly stressful time for your family. Your relatives now, what's going on with them?
So some of Nadia's relatives are still in Gaza. You will have seen we did a video yesterday, actually, in relation to an update of a couple of our relatives. Her first cousin, Sally, who's there with her 4 children, her aunt Hanan, who's got a grandchildren as young as 7 months old. And what else is there to say, Sheila? Everybody is witnessing the images. It's, in my opinion, the first live stream genocide we ever witnessed. We are seeing children emaciated. We are seeing families just be in the most atrocious humanitarian conditions I think we've ever witnessed. And I think what makes it all the more harder is that this is entirely man-made. You can dispute the number being 1,000-day trucks or 6,000-day trucks or 60,000-day trucks, but there is plenty of aid there that is ready to come in. Probably not enough, but there is aid there ready at the border, and it is being deliberately withheld. And just to go back to your point, I know we'll probably get into the geopolitics in a second, but to get to your point, there's claim and counterclaim. I would say that it is important to really look at who is making those claims. So you've either got the United Nations, multilateral institution, got its faults for sure, but a multilateral institution that is generally widely respected, or the Israeli government, which is headed at the moment, as we speak, by a man who's wanted by the International Criminal Court for war crimes, crimes against humanity, one of which, by the way, is using starvation as a weapon of war.
Yeah, I mean, I will come back on all of that, I promise you, before our conversation finishes. Keen to get a picture, really, of... because, you know, it's so difficult, isn't it? When you look at the map, you see the overhead shots, you see the devastation, you wonder how anyone is getting anywhere to get anything, even if there is aid around the corner or up the road or 10 miles away. You wonder how anybody's getting anywhere. What are your relatives able to tell you about what they can do to try to get food and what they face when they do that?
Well, can I give you Sally's direct words from last night? So she was, we obviously put the story out with her permission, and she saw the video that Nadia and I put out talking about Sally's own story, and her first words to us were that I hate this world, and that's it. I mean, I'm a father of 3 girls, and for anybody that has children, or even if you don't, you have nieces, nephews, maybe you're a godparent. When a child is in pain, and even if it's just something like a cold...
To be honest, I think in this situation, if you'd never met a child in your life and saw some of these pictures, you'd be feeling like Sally, I think.
No, agreed. But I suppose my point is, my youngest, who's 1 year old, has got a cold, and you feel utterly helpless. It's just a bunch of snotters, and she's coughing away, and
But she's suffering a little bit. Yeah.
But you feel completely helpless. What Sally says is, well, my 4 children are starving in my arms, and I'm starving because you can't forget, although we talk a lot rightly about children, Sally hasn't eaten a proper meal in God knows how long. And Sally at least has family in the UK. Although we can send her money, actually, it doesn't. There's no way of her really accessing that money. But she at least is able to, even if a loaf of bread is costing $17 or $20. She's able to maybe, if they can find it, get it.
But as I understand it, it's not, in many cases, it's not a money problem. It's it's an empty markets problem. It's an
exactly that. So that's exactly my point. Even we can send money to Sally, that wouldn't be an issue. But the problem is that she can't get that money out, and there's no way of accessing supplies that aren't there. And I think the other thing that Sally says is you have to remember that these people, and I'll give you Sally's example, has been forcibly displaced. Well, she stopped counting, but at last count it was 15 times. Now, being displaced once is traumatic in itself. 15 times. And that yes, 15, and that's not unusual, of course. And so now living in a tent in 40 degrees heat, and we've just had this heat wave in the UK where we maybe got to temperatures of maybe at highest kind of 35 or something, and it was quite unbearable for most of us, and we lived in our houses with fans and so on and so forth. So it's a miserable situation. It's really hard for me to describe. I think
can
more than the
tell,
pictures.
and I can tell listening to you that you are conscious of your own creature comforts in a painful way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, Nadia and I, we try to make sure that we instill in the children even more gratitude for everything we have, and saying how lucky and blessed we are for everything we have, and to be frank, feeling guilty for the fact that we have so much. And remember, this is Nadia's cousin. It's her uncle's and auntie's daughter. It's a very close relation.
These are the people that your wife's parents were visiting at the beginning of this war.
Exactly that.
And how are they doing now?
I mean, Nadia used to go back to Gaza every single summer until the blockade took place. So these are people that she's exceptionally close to. Sorry, you were about to say.
I was about to say, how are Elizabeth and Maged now since they've come back, your in-laws?
I mean, they're never going to be the same, if I'm being, to be frank with you. I mean, 4 weeks, and you can say, okay, it was 4 weeks, but it was 4 weeks in a war zone where they didn't know whether they would live or they would die, and the things they saw will never leave them. And Majid, my father-in-law, I think, has become maybe a shell of a man compared to what he was before October the 7th and before he was there. And my mother-in-law, I think, deeply traumatized by what we see. I don't think they'll ever be the same again, in truth, but their focus is on their family there in Gaza now. If you think about what they went through in 4 weeks and what the family that are still there are going through 21 months later, it's the psychological torment, I think, is something that will be with them forever.
So listen, what is gonna urgently break this deadlock that exists? Because the new food distribution process clearly is massively problematic. The IDF and Israel say that was well, you know this, I'm just saying it so people can frame the conversation in their minds. The IDF and the Israeli government say the only reason that was instituted at all was because of the levels of corruption from Hamas with the original food distribution system, which was clearly more effective. Now you've got this business of the UN saying, let the 6,000 lorries in, and Israel saying, well, we've got 1,000 already on your side, but you won't deliver them, and that will go on. But how do we break that dreadful, almost game that we see being played, so that food gets to people who need it, and medical aid, of course, as well?
Well, a few things. First and foremost, I go back to my point. There are international NGOs and multilateral institutions that have gone into some of the world's worst conflict zones: Sudan, Somalia, DRC, Yemen, you name it. They've been in some of the worst, Ukraine on our continent, have been in some of the worst conflict zones in the world and have managed to distribute aid and do that very effectively. And by the way, have done that without massacring 1,000 people who've been queuing up for food. So those networks existed, and I just refuse to believe that they were incapable of doing so in Gaza, even though they've done so for many decades already. And I go back to my point, Sheila, that when we're talking about Israel's commentary or the lines they're putting out or the justification they're putting forward, this is a government that is led by a man who's wanted for war crimes. How do you break it? That's the more important question, I think. Well, I think this is the time where we need world governments and leaders to not be so impotent and inactive. To
push harder.
Well, statements and speeches are not going to end the suffering. Words aren't going to feed the children of Gaza. You're going to have to treat Israel in the way that the world governments treated the apartheid regime in South Africa. Israel under Benjamin Netanyahu has become a rogue nation, breaking international law with impunity, killing aid workers, humanitarian workers, children. So therefore, if I just finish this one point very quickly, they really need to make sure that they're feeling the pressure. So sanctions, stop selling arms, and begin to recognise the state of Palestine, which will then increase their pressure on the Israeli government.
Can I ask you, I had this conversation a few days ago with callers to LBC. I understand what you just said. Do you think a more effective, if we really want these people fed, clearly a ceasefire would be everybody's hoped for outcome? Wouldn't that be more likely if the focus wasn't only on what Israel is doing, because we know, yes, absolutely the focus should be what on Israel is doing, because it is clearly the major player in this, But you've got Hamas, you've got Qatar, you've got Jordan, you've got Egypt, just geographically around that strip, who are also big players in this in terms of discussing the ceasefire and the pressure that can be exerted. It's important that all of those elements are brought in, isn't it? And actively used and encouraged and pushed to get this solution and to get those hungry children in particular fed.
Well, look, with the greatest respect, and I'm going to come back to this point, it is the Israeli government that is stopping food from coming in. They will use whatever reason and justification for it, but they are the ones that are blocking food from getting to the mouths of babies. And they are the ones that are gunning people down through their mercenaries and the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation.
As are members of Hamas. I mean, I'm only doing my job when I point that out. I don't deny that the GHF has been very
I don't care less about Hamas, and was one of the first, like everybody else, to condemn the attacks on October the 7th. But you cannot blame the children, which I know you're not doing, but you cannot blame the children who are being starved to death. They are not Hamas.
No, they're not, and I'm not suggesting for a second it's ever acceptable.
So
what I'm trying to, if I can, what I'm trying to get to.
I take a point. I'm going to address it.
Okay.
I mean, the point about Qatar, for example.
Very powerful player.
And the others, very powerful, and that's why they've been involved in trying to bring this ceasefire about. I would take you back to what some former Israeli government ministers and even Israeli press have said, and now have openly reported, which is that Netanyahu, in fact, it was in the New York Times as well, I think, if I'm not mistaken, that Netanyahu is deliberately prolonging the war for his own political gain. And I don't think there's anybody that now disputes that fact, that it's not within his best interest, personal best interest, for a ceasefire to occur. But goodness, yes, of course, every government in the world, every government in the world has a responsibility when a genocide is taking place. And if you could disagree it's a genocide, you just have to look at the images to say what is happening is absolutely, utterly shameful. It cannot be allowed to go on, must stop. And I'm afraid, I think the only way that's going to happen is if world governments place pressure on the Israeli government to do the right thing. And I'm afraid the statements from the Israeli government,
the right thing being,
for many months now,
let more trucks through. And will the UN aid agencies cooperate with them to get that food through? They're currently saying,
honestly,
they're currently saying they won't.
Unless you can point me to any evidence otherwise, I do not see what the UN or any international NGO has done wrong.
Well, it's not difficult for me to do that. Honestly, I'm not trying to be antagonistic at all, because God knows this is not about political antagonism. This is about getting kids fed and how the hell we get that done. The reason I raise that is there is without doubt still a roadblock, if you will, between Israel and the UN about who will get in those trucks, move them, who will secure them. Only this week, the UN said no thank you to the IDF's offer for some of those 950 trucks that are on the Gaza side to move. Now, they said they prefer what they call the blue police, I think they're called, which is the Hamas police. Now, the Hamas authorities. Whatever anybody thinks of that, and the fact that Israel is saying we don't trust UNRWA, we're not even recognising UNRWA anymore, all of these are factors that are getting in the way of your family and every family being fed. So what do we do about that would be my question.
I think what we do about that is, again, its pressure is important, because the United Nations and other NGOs that are well known, your Christian Aids, your
Save the Children,
Catholic aid agencies, your Save the Children, Médecins Sans Frontières, all these organisations that have got decades and decades of experience in conflict resolution are well trusted. So even if you don't trust one player, two players, three players, you don't want UNRWA to be anywhere near it, whatever. There are plenty of aid agencies who have got a far better track record than the IDF or the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation that has massacred 1,000 people that have been waiting for aid. They are able to do the job. They've done it in virtually every conflict zone.
I'm aware of that, but they have said they won't do that particular job without security.
No. So what we now need is the international community, and you're hearing statements. So we've had statements from the UK government, we've had statements from Canadians, from the French. even some in the United States beginning to say this is unacceptable and morally unjustifiable. But the statements alone aren't going to do enough. Israel has to feel the pressure. And look, where the UN has to feel the pressure, fine, but I don't honestly see any evidence of the UN being the blocker here. I see the country that has said very openly, members of the Israeli government have said very openly that we want to make
appalling things,
Gaza uninhabitable so that those people leave and that they then occupy that land. They are the ones that are clearly being the blockers in all of this.